Welcome, traveler of the night. Tonight, you are invited to wander away from the warmth of familiar rooms and into places where time lingers, where silence has weight, and where shadows seem to breathe. These are not inventions of imagination, but real haunted house experiences. Stories whispered by those who stepped inside and never forgot what they encountered. Each house has its own memory. Each carries echoes of footsteps, voices, and faces that no longer belong to the living. Do not expect sharp screams or sudden frights. Instead, allow these stories to settle slowly, like mist crawling through abandoned halls. The rhythm will be calm, the words steady, the dread unfolding quietly, like doors opening one by one. So close your eyes if you wish. Breathe in, breathe out, and let us begin our journey into 3 houses where the walls still remember. Our first path leads us far from towns and people, down a country road where fields stretch endlessly. In a valley surrounded by silence, an old farmhouse waits. Its doors are open, its windows stare, and though no family lives there now, it is far from empty. Story 1. The old farmhouse in the valley. The farmhouse sat alone in the valley, where the road curved and disappeared into the trees. From a distance, it looked as though the land itself had grown tired of holding it upright. Its roof sagged inward, its chimney leaned at a strange angle, and its once white boards had turned the color of ash. Travelers passing through sometimes slowed their cars when they saw it, but few ever stopped. For the house was not only empty, it was avoided. The locals had stories. They said the farmhouse had been abandoned for more than 40 years, ever since the family who lived there vanished without explanation. Neighbors remembered seeing smoke rising from the chimney one evening, and by the next morning, the place was silent, its doors unlocked, its dinner table set for a meal no one would ever finish. Some claimed the family had moved away in the night. Others whispered darker things, that something in the valley had claimed them. What remained beyond question was this: no one who had tried to live there afterward had stayed longer than a season. And so the farmhouse waited. Weather rotted its frame, storms stripped its shingles, vines crawled over its porch like veins. But it never truly slept. It was in late October when 3 travelers came across it. Their car had broken down miles from the nearest town. The sky was turning purple with dusk, and the chill of autumn seeped into their bones as they debated what to do. They saw the farmhouse first as a shadow against the fading light. Windows like empty eyes, a roofline jagged as broken teeth. It stood at the end of a gravel path, half hidden by tall grass that swayed without wind. "We could try there," one of them said reluctantly. "It's shelter at least." The others hesitated. Everything about the place suggested don't. But the alternative was a night in the open fields, with nothing but cold and darkness for company. And so they went. The gate at the end of the path was iron, its hinges rusted but still intact. When they touched it, the metal was strangely warm, as if the sun had never left it. They exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, pushing it open with a groan that echoed too loudly in the quiet valley. The front door was ajar, as though someone had just stepped inside and forgotten to close it. One of them knocked, half in jest, half in hope that some farmer might answer. No one did. Inside, the air was thick and damp, carrying the sour smell of mildew. The floorboards groaned as though resenting the intrusion. And in the far corner of the main room, a single object remained, a rocking chair. It was old, its paint chipped to bare wood. It was still when they entered. But as they set down their bags, a draft passed through the room, and the chair began to move, back and forth. Slowly, deliberately. The three froze. Then one forced a laugh. "It's just the wind," though none of them could explain how, with every window closed tight and the air so heavy it felt like cloth. They decided to stay downstairs for the night, keeping close together in the main room. The silence pressed on them like weight. Every creak of the house seemed too loud, every gust of wind against the siding too sharp. By midnight the sounds began. At first it was faint, the soft thud of footsteps, as though someone were shifting upstairs. The three exchanged glances, trying to read in each other's faces whether they had heard the same thing. Then it grew louder, clear, distinct. Steps crossing the floor directly above them, one after another, with the rhythm of a person walking steadily back and forth. But there was no one upstairs. They had seen the staircase coated in a thick layer of dust. No one had disturbed it in years. The footsteps stopped. Then came a new sound, something heavy being dragged across the floor. Slowly, with effort. The kind of sound a piece of furniture makes when pulled across wooden boards. One of them swallowed hard. "I'll go look," he whispered. The others begged him not to, but he was already moving toward the stairs. Each step groaned under his weight. His hand trembled on the banister as he peered into the darkness above. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors. Dust lay thick on the floor, unbroken. Yet the footsteps started again, right in front of him. Closer, closer. He stared at the dust. Nothing disturbed it. No prints, no marks. And yet, the sound of walking continued, moving past him down the hall. At the end, one of the doors swung shut. Softly, but with purpose. The man stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs. His face was pale, his voice a broken whisper. "There's no one there." "But there is." They huddled together in the corner of the main room, their fear thick as the shadows pressing in. The house fell silent for a time, and then it began again. Not footsteps, not dragging, but laughter. "Hi, Delicate." The laughter of a child, drifting down the staircase like smoke. The sound came closer. It moved around the room, circling them. It slipped behind them, though no one was there. And finally it came from the rocking chair, which had begun to move again. Back, and forth, and forth, and back. None of them spoke. None dared move. The laughter faded, replaced by a whisper, too faint to catch. But all three swore later that it had spoken their names. That was enough. They fled, stumbling through the tall grass, not stopping until the farmhouse was a distant shadow. When they reached their car, it started at once, though earlier it had refused to turn over no matter how many times they tried. They did not look back. The farmhouse still stands in the valley. Its roof more broken, its walls more sunken, yet somehow still waiting. Travelers passing at night say they see a faint light moving in the upper windows. Some claim they've heard the creak of a rocking chair carried on the wind. And others, the brave or the foolish, say they've walked close enough to hear the laughter. Hi, Delicate. The laughter of a child who never left. And those who hear it never truly forget. For the farmhouse is not just a ruin. It is a memory that will not die. A house that is not empty, but occupied by echoes. By footsteps. By whispers. By the endless rocking of a chair in the corner, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. The farmhouse fades into memory, its laughter still clinging to the air. But our journey does not end there. Now we step into a different place, a house not hidden in the countryside, but in the very heart of a small town. A place where strangers came and went, but some never truly left. Story 2. The boarding house with shadows in the hall. The boarding house sat on the corner of a quiet street, its once proud frame sagging with the weight of nearly a century. When it had first been built, in the roaring 20s, it had been a cheerful place. Travelers came through town on trains that cut across the state, and many stopped at the boarding house for a night or two. Its walls had once smelled of home-cooked meals and coal fires, its rooms filled with the bustle of voices and laughter. But that was long ago. By the late 1970s, the world had moved on. The train station was shuttered, the street quieter, the town itself shrinking into memory. The house remained, but like an aging actor left on stage long after the audience had gone, it no longer seemed to know what role it was meant to play. Its wallpaper had yellowed. Its carpets were thin and frayed. Its lights burned weakly, as though tired of illuminating the same shadows year after year. And yet, it still opened its doors to travelers. Some stayed a night, some stayed a week, but few stayed longer. Those who did often left with stories they struggled to explain. Stories of footsteps echoing through empty halls, of mirrors that reflected more than they should, of dreams so vivid they felt like warnings. One of those travelers was Margaret. Margaret was a schoolteacher, practical and orderly, who had been sent to a nearby town for a week-long conference. The small city hotels were all full, so she had been directed, reluctantly, to the old boarding house on the edge of town. The owner was an elderly man with stooped shoulders and tired eyes. He greeted her with a polite but distant manner, as if he had long since given up trying to make the place feel welcoming. "You'll be upstairs," he said simply, handing her a brass key that was worn smooth from decades of use. The stairs groaned as she climbed, the air growing cooler with every step. Her room was small but tidy. A narrow bed, a wooden dresser, a nightstand with a lamp, and against one wall, a tall mirror in a frame so old its silver backing was beginning to darken. Margaret set down her suitcase and smoothed the quilt on the bed. The room was plain but sufficient. She told herself it would do. That night, however, sleep did not come easily. Sometime after midnight, Margaret awoke to the sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and they came from the hallway just outside her door. She sat up, her heart thudding in the stillness. The sound grew louder, passing her door, then fading, only to return, moving back the other way. Someone was pacing. She listened for minutes that felt like hours. Finally, unable to bear it, she rose, crossed the room, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The single light bulb overhead flickered faintly, casting weak pools of yellow that dissolved into shadow. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something sour, metallic. Yet the sound continued, not in the hall before her, but as if just out of sight, always a few steps away. Shaken, Margaret closed her door, locked it, and returned to bed. The footsteps faded only toward dawn. On the second night, she told herself it had been nothing, an old house settling, a trick of her half-sleeping mind. But once again, sometime after midnight, she woke. This time it was not footsteps. Her eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains, and she noticed something strange, the mirror. Its surface was fogged, as though someone had stood before it, breathing warm air across the glass. Margaret frowned. The room was cold, her breath clouded faintly in the air. She had not touched the mirror. She rose and approached, heart tight in her chest. On the fogged surface, faint lines had been traced. Letters. Not full words, not clear enough to read, but the unmistakable shapes of letters scrawled by a finger across the condensation. As she watched, they began to fade, vanishing back into blankness. Margaret pressed her hand against the glass. It was icy cold. She did not sleep again that night. By the third night, exhaustion had set in. She left the lamp on by her bed, determined that light would keep her calm. But at some point in the dark hours, the bulb gave a sharp pop, and the room was swallowed in shadow. Her eyes opened. She stared into the darkness, disoriented. And then she saw it. The mirror. In the faint light of the window, she could see her reflection, pale and half-formed. But there was something else. Behind her reflection stood a figure. Tall, thin, its outline blurred, as though it had stepped out of the shadows themselves. Its face was pale, its eyes dark hollows. It stood perfectly still, but she felt it was watching her. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly she turned, her body trembling. The room behind her was empty, but when she looked back to the mirror, the figure was still there. Closer now. She backed away, nearly tripping over the bed. The figure did not move, yet somehow it seemed to draw nearer. The air grew colder. Her breath came in clouds. And then faintly she heard a whisper. It was not from the hallway, not from the room. It was from the mirror itself. Her name, spoken softly, slowly, as though someone on the other side of the glass was calling her. That was enough. Margaret grabbed her suitcase, half-packed, and fled down the stairs. She did not care that it was 3 a.m, or that the owner might think her mad. He was waiting in the lobby. He did not look surprised. He did not ask why. He only nodded once, his expression unreadable, and said, "You're not the first." Later, Margaret learned more about the house. Decades earlier, one of the upstairs rooms had caught fire. The guest inside had been trapped, their body never recovered intact. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of something darker. Since then, the boarding house had changed. Mirrors sometimes fogged without reason. Guests often heard footsteps pacing in the halls. Some saw figures behind them in glass, though no one was there when they turned. The old man never denied it. He kept the house open, perhaps out of necessity, perhaps because he no longer knew how to do anything else. And still travelers came. Most left quickly. Those who stayed longer never forgot what they experienced. Margaret, even years later, could recall the sound of her name whispered from the mirror. She could remember the figure that watched from behind her reflection. She never stayed in a boarding house again. And the old building remains, still standing, its rooms available, its mirrors waiting. If you ever pass through that town and find yourself desperate for shelter, you might end up there. If you do, listen carefully to the halls at night. Watch the mirrors. And if you see a figure behind you, pale and hollow-eyed, do not turn. Because the boarding house has a way of keeping those who acknowledge what lives in its shadows. Some places are remembered by history, some by memory, and some, like the boarding house, by the things that refuse to leave. The boarding house grows quiet once more, its mirrors clouded with silence. But our path is not yet complete. One final place awaits, standing by the sea. A house where the waves never rest, and where time itself seems to stand still. Story 3. The coastal house where time stood still. The house stood at the very edge of the coast, where the land gave way to jagged cliffs and the endless pull of the sea. From a distance it looked small against the horizon, a lonely silhouette framed by restless waves and skies that always seemed to brood. Its wooden boards were gray with salt, its shutters warped by storms, its roof slanted as though bowing to the power of the ocean that had battered it for more than a century. It had belonged once to a family of sailors. Generations had come and gone, each leaving behind their tools, their keepsakes, their stories. But the sea had claimed many of them, men who had set out in sturdy boats only to be swallowed by storms. The house became less a home and more a shrine to those who never returned. Over time, it gained a reputation. Visitors said the air inside never warmed, no matter how brightly the fire burned. They said the walls groaned not with age, but as if mimicking the timbers of a sinking ship. They said the house itself seemed to bend time, rooms shifting when you weren't looking, windows showing storms even on calm, bright days. Few dared stay there long, but one couple did. Their names were Daniel and Claire. Newly married, they were looking for a quiet weekend retreat by the sea. They found the house listed in an old rental brochure, an oddity overlooked by most but cheap enough to tempt them. When they arrived, the ocean air was sharp, the wind carrying salt and the distant cries of gulls. The house looked even older up close, its siding rough, its windows clouded with sea spray. But inside it was tidy, furnished with simple pieces that seemed frozen in another time. A brass clock ticked on the mantel, though neither of them wound it. A ship's wheel hung above the fireplace, its wood darkened by years of handling. Seashells lined the shelves, each coated in a fine layer of dust. "It's charming," Claire said, forcing a smile. Daniel agreed, though something about the place unsettled him. He brushed it aside. It was only a house, after all. That first evening, they walked along the cliffs, watching the waves crash below. The sea was violent but beautiful. They returned to the house as night fell, cooked a small meal, and settled into the upstairs bedroom. The sound of the ocean lulled them to sleep, until the knocking began. It was subtle at first, 3 knocks evenly spaced. Daniel stirred, half asleep, thinking it was the wind. But then it came again. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, on the wall beside their bed. Claire sat up, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, listening. The sound came once more, from inside the wall itself, as though someone stood on the other side waiting. Daniel searched the room, tapping the walls, checking the window. Nothing explained it. Finally, the sound stopped, leaving only the crash of waves and their pounding hearts. They tried to sleep again, but rest came fitfully, broken by every creak and groan of the house. The second night, things grew stranger. They had left their belongings scattered on the dresser and nightstand before going to bed. But when they awoke, the items had been moved. Not misplaced. Not stolen. Arranged. Daniel's watch, Claire's hairbrush, a small pocket knife, and even the coins from his jacket, all laid out neatly in symmetrical patterns across the floor. At first, Daniel thought Claire had done it. She thought the same of him. But the look in each other's eyes told them the truth. Neither had. The air felt heavy that morning, as though the house was watching them. They tried to shake it off, spending the day outside, hiking the cliffs, breathing the salt air. But when they returned, the atmosphere was worse. The rooms seemed darker, even though the lamps burned. Shadows lingered in corners too long after they should have shifted. That night they double-checked the locks, pushed furniture against the door, and left the lamp burning bright. It did not help. Daniel woke in the small hours of the morning, the lamp flickering faintly. Moonlight spilled through the salt-streaked window, casting silver across the floor. He turned toward Claire, who was fast asleep. Relief flickered through him. And then he saw it. At the far side of the room, facing the window, stood a figure. Its back was turned, shoulders slumped, arms hanging loosely. It was tall, its outline blurred by the pale light. For a moment, Daniel thought it was Claire, though she lay beside him. Then he thought it might be a trick of the shadows. But as his eyes adjusted, dread tightened his chest. The figure's head tilted just slightly, as if listening to the sea. And then slowly it turned. Daniel's breath froze. It was himself. His own face pale and lifeless. His lips blue, his eyes hollow and drowned. Water dripped from his hair, pooling at his feet. His reflection, not in glass but standing before him. Daniel gasped, sitting bolt upright. The sound broke the moment. The figure vanished, leaving only the wavering moonlight and the crash of waves below. Claire woke, startled by his panic, but the room was empty. He could not explain what he had seen. They did not sleep again. By dawn they decided to leave. But the house was not finished with them. As they gathered their belongings, they heard it again. The knocking. 3 times on the wall by the bed. Then again from the ceiling above. Then from the floorboards beneath their feet. It followed them from room to room, echoing faintly, always just behind them. When Daniel opened the front door, a gust of wind swept through the house, slamming every interior door at once. The sound reverberated like a ship breaking apart. They fled without looking back, their car sliding on the wet gravel as they sped away from the coast. The house still stands. Fishermen say they see lights moving through its windows on stormy nights, as though lanterns are being carried from room to room. Some say the house shifts, its doors opening into rooms that no longer exist, its windows showing storms even when the skies above are clear. And a few claim that if you walk the beach at night, the waves carry voices. Not the cries of gulls, not the roar of the tide, but human voices, calling your name, soft and persistent, as though the sea itself remembers you. Daniel and Claire never returned. They told their story only once, reluctantly, as though speaking it aloud gave the house power over them again. But their account matches others who dared to stay. The knocking, the rearranged belongings, the figure that mirrors you, drowned and lifeless. It is said the house does not haunt you in the usual way. It does not show strangers or ghosts of others. Instead, it shows you, not as you are, but as you will be if the sea has its way. Some houses keep memories. This one keeps futures. And if you ever find yourself standing on the cliffs, gazing at the lonely house with the salt-stained windows, remember this. Time does not flow the same within its walls. And once you see yourself staring back, pale and hollow-eyed, you may never truly leave. And so, our journey ends. 3 houses, 3 stories, 3 real haunted house experiences that linger not just in wood and stone, but in the memories of those who entered. Perhaps tonight, your own home will stay silent. Perhaps. Or perhaps you may hear a creak on the stair, a whisper in the hall, or the faint sound of someone laughing where no one should be. Rest now. Let the stories keep watch. Good night.